All right, thank you everybody again for coming. The same format will apply to the district attorney's race and the candidate forum. And as Mr. Barajas may explain further, each candidate will be given 2 minutes to answer their questions, as well as 30 seconds to rebut if necessary or requested. And without any further ado, it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce to you all our moderator for this forum, Dr. Frank P. Barajas. He is the professor of United States history at Cal State University Channel Islands. He has worked since his return to Ventura County in 2001. With specialization in the history of Southern California, Professor Barajas has published peer-reviewed essays on agricultural labor in Ventura County, the Sleepy Lagoon trial, Oxnard schools, and the 2004 implementation of a civil gang injunction in the city of Oxnard. He is also a lifelong resident of Ventura County, except for his stint at Fresno State, my hometown of Fresno. Thank you, everybody. Please welcome Dr. Frank Barajas.
Thank you, Livia. I'm just going to go over and welcome to the second part of this forum, everyone. I'll go over briefly the ground rules again. A coin toss before the forum was won by District Attorney Nasarenko, and he then deferred to Deputy District Attorney John Barrack. So we'll go from there. I will address the questions to both candidates. Each candidate will be expected to answer every question within 2 minutes. And the timekeeper will give a 1-minute marker and also a 30-second marker, and I will stop politely if needed each of the candidates. The moderator may permit a candidate to provide a 30-second response or rebuttal at the end. Candidates will have 2 minutes at the end for closing statements. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the candidates. First, DA Erik Nasarenko. Like many in our audience, Ventura County, District Attorney Nasarenko is a son of immigrants. His parents fled Ukraine during the Second World War and arrived in the United States after spending 5 years in refugee camps. They taught Erik the importance of giving back and helping others, values that Erik believes are essential to his job and mission as district attorney. Now we have Senior Deputy DA John Barrack. He says he is a 17-year prosecutor with the Ventura County District Attorney's Office, who grew up in Oxnard, as I did, John. And graduated from Oxnard High School in 1987. Although John currently serves in the Major Crimes Homicide Unit, he has gained experience in a variety of matters due to the numerous types of cases he has prosecuted throughout his career, including burglaries, robberies, domestic violence, child abuse, violent assaults, and cold case murders. In fact, one of John's cold cases will be featured this Friday night, May 6th on A&E, Network's Cold Cases Files, quote unquote, which will air at 9 o'clock. Please welcome John Barrack. I'll start off with, again, we had a coin toss, and DA Nasarenko won, but he deferred the first question to Senior Deputy Prosecutor John Barrack. And here we go. The California Racial Justice Act prohibits racial discrimination in convictions and sentences and creates a process to challenge racial discrimination at trial or following conviction. Still, systemic racism is widely perceived throughout the state in charging practices, plea negotiations, sentencing recommendations, and more. How well do you believe Ventura County has complied with the Racial Justice Act? And how will you identify and address any systemic racism that exists within your office?
So I can just speak to you from my personal experience. Ventura County is actually very blessed. We have really great prosecutors, and I have never seen one of our prosecutors ever prosecute anyone more heavily or harshly because of their race or ethnicity. And I can tell you, I have never done that. I've never once considered someone's race at all when I prosecuted them. I've always been proud of the fact that I'm an aggressive prosecutor, and because I've always put victims first. And so I guess to answer the question, I would say I believe Ventura County is adequately following that law and not prosecuting anyone based on their ethnicity or any other factor. We look at the circumstances of the offense, we file the appropriate charges, and we prosecute. And that's what I have seen from my coworkers. That is myself, something that I've done. A little bit about my background. I prosecuted hate crimes for 6.5 years. And during that time, I prosecuted every defendant with the same aggressiveness, regardless of who they were. I've prosecuted white supremacists, and I've defended all manner of victims, including transgendered. And again, I did it with the same vigor and aggressiveness I've always prosecuted my cases and always will.
Thank you. District Attorney?
I'd like to begin by thanking Professor Barajas, the social justice organizations that have convened tonight's forum, Pacifica High School, and all of you for joining us this evening. One of the ways that we can address any bias, implicit or explicit, is through hiring, by making sure that we hire attorneys and investigators, which is what we are doing, that are reflective of the broad diversity of Ventura County. I'm very proud of the attorneys and the investigators we have hired. Most recently, we brought in from Santa Barbara County a Spanish-speaking investigator, Freddy Padilla. We also brought in from the Ventura County Sheriff's Department a Spanish-speaking investigator, Jose Lopez, and we are now about to hire a new female Latina investigator very shortly. We also have broadened the number of prosecutors, bringing in those who come from socioeconomically distressed communities, in particular, those who come from communities of color, because I believe when they bring those backgrounds, experiences, and insights into this position, it will help to continue even greater justice, equity, and inclusivity in all aspects of our profession. But I will say to you that we have to train, and that's exactly what we have done. We have trained on AB 3070 to talk about the use of peremptory challenges at trial. And our prosecutors, the men and women, as well as our investigators and our victim advocates, will continue to represent justice, to look at the facts and circumstances of each case, and make the decisions accordingly. We do have an outstanding team of advocates, prosecutors, and investigators, and I want to expand the diversity within those ranks in the years and months to come.
Thank you. Next question will go for you, District Attorney again. The District Attorney's Office works closely with police officers and sheriff's deputies. How do those relationships position you to promote police reform, particularly accountability for police misconduct and policies related to de-escalation and use of force? Given the close collaboration between your office and law enforcement, how can you overcome potential conflicts of interest when investigating and charging officers for allegations of excessive force or other misconduct?
Yeah, great question, Professor. The answer is you have a layered and complex system of engagement with law enforcement, and I'll explain that in just a moment. I want to begin by stating that we are blessed and fortunate in Ventura County to have outstanding law enforcement agencies. We work daily with them. They put their lives on the line. They respond to some very difficult and trying and life-endangering situations. In terms of our relationship, we are both a collaborative entity, but we're also an oversight one. We have a responsibility when misconduct occurs, whether it's criminal in nature or otherwise, to oftentimes investigate it. So one of the ways we do that is by ensuring that those who are engaged in the actual inquiry of somebody in law enforcement are not necessarily the ones that are working with them on a day-to-day basis. That's what I meant by we have multiple layers. So you have a chain of command In that chain of command, reports, complaints, investigations are brought forward, but they are ultimately decided not by those who are in the trenches every day reviewing individual officers' cases, but ultimately by those who are removed, and through that removal may not necessarily have those ties that can create affinity and other types of situations.
A brief follow-up, and how does that work with, for example, police chiefs? I mean, who feel like they have the authority above immediate people in question, right?
Well, I can't speak to internal departments, but I will share with you that, again, very fortunate in Ventura County to have a monthly meeting with all the police chiefs, the captains and lieutenants of the California Highway Patrol, and our sheriff, where we roundtable issues of importance in the law enforcement community. We update one another on new laws. We've talked about, for example, I saw California Highway Patrol here, and how do we deal with issues off the 101 in terms of illegal exhibition of speed, people who are abusing state and county properties with their vehicles. So this is a forum by which we exchange information, we build trust, and ultimately we develop the lines of communication that make this community safer.
Thank you. Senior Deputy District Attorney?
You can just call me John if you want. And by the way, I wanted everyone to know that neither Jim Fryhoff, Mr. Nasarenko, nor I got together and coordinated our outfits before the debate tonight. So let me start by saying that one of the reasons I decided to run for DA was because I didn't like the way law enforcement was being treated over the last several years, especially in Ventura County. I think we have great police officers. That doesn't mean there's not room for improvement, but I believed that we needed to be more supportive of police officers and the work they do keeping us safe. And to that end, it's because of my experience and my work for crime victims that I've been endorsed by every peace officer association in Ventura County. However, my guiding principle has been and always will be victims come first. And for me, what that meant was serving crime victims and their families was more important than my pride, my ego, my professional career if necessary. And let me be blunt about this. If a police officer ever does anything to create a victim, I will prosecute that cop because my guiding principle is victims come first. I support law enforcement supports me, but I've made it very clear to them that if anyone ever does anything that warrants a criminal prosecution, I'm going to prosecute because I won't stand for anything less. Now, before I received the endorsement of all the police officer associations, I actually asked them how they felt about my stance on this. Because I don't know how many people have actually bothered to ask respective police officers how they feel. And I have yet to meet anyone who is against that. They understand change is necessary. They understand their tactics need to change. They just ask, if this is what the community wants, we'll do it, but we need to be retrained. Retraining requires money. If the community wants a different type of policing, they're all in. Like I said, I've yet to meet a police officer who said otherwise. And so, again, I support law enforcement, but I have no problems holding them accountable if they create a crime victim.
Same follow-up in regards, what's your history in working with command structures like police chiefs in other cities?
So I've been a prosecutor for over 17 years, and there's a lot of police officers I grew up with. What I mean by that is I started off my career with them. There's police officers who started off as patrol officers the same time I started off as a misdemeanor deputy, and now a lot of those have advanced into command structure. Some of them I consider very good friends. That doesn't matter because my guiding principle is victims come first. I've always followed that rule. I can't even begin to tell you how important it is to have a guiding principle. And they understand. I wanted to serve the public. It took me a long time to get here, to meander through my life, figure out what I wanted to do, and be a prosecutor. When I made that decision, I wanted to serve the public. I wanted to be a real public servant, putting the needs of the public first. If that means I have to prosecute police officers to do it, whom I respect greatly, then that's what I'm going to do, even if they're command staff.
Thank you. You have the next question too, John. According to research published by the American Psychological Association, Black youth, and I would say particularly Black male youth, often are not given the same presumption of childhood innocence as their white peers, but are mistaken as older, are presumed guilty, and face police violence when suspected of a crime. It is widely agreed that Latinx youth are treated in a similar manner. In many cases, the perceptions and the responses of school resource officers are critical to this disparity. How do you perceive the equity or lack of same in your office's record of charging children, particularly those who are referred by SROs? And follow-up, another question, part of the question is, will you commit to investigating disparate treatment of children of color when deciding to charge minors as adults or to recommend enhanced sentences for children?
Just clarification, when you say children, are you speaking of juveniles?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, because children, there's a certain age when children can't be prosecuted. So we're talking about someone 14 or between 14 and 17.
Yes.
Okay, so when I was in the gang unit, I was probably the most aggressive prosecutor when it came to charging juveniles, especially juveniles as adults. And I did that because I loathed gang violence. Now, growing up in Oxnard, I've been the victim of gang violence. I've been jumped, I've been threatened numerous times, and I just don't like street gangs, okay? And so to that end, though, things have changed, and people want to see more programs, and they want to see more equal treatment of juveniles and not filing as adults. If that's what society wants, then I'm all for it. You know, I have to admit that my approach wasn't always the correct one. I can say that now, but sometimes there's a juvenile, especially a 16 or 17-year-old who commits a crime that's very, very serious and hurts someone very, very badly. And there's no other approach, I believe, than treating them as adults. Laws were passed recently where we can't treat 14 and 15-year-olds as adult court anymore. We can't prosecute them in adult court at all. I have a problem with such strict, narrow following of the law because it doesn't allow for those special circumstances when maybe treating someone who's 14 or 15-year-old as an adult is appropriate. There's a case that came out of Davis, California a few years ago, and a 15-year-old dreamed of being a serial killer and actually acted out and killed an elderly couple in their bed, and he did grotesque things to their bodies during the murder and after. That person is getting out this month, and there's nothing we can do about it, which means before he can be taken off the streets forever, he's going to have to probably kill someone again. And I don't want my family to be the sacrificial lamb in that, and I don't think anyone else does either. I'm in favor of treatment programs that help juveniles to get them off the track of going to prison, but I think we need more flexibility in the law to prosecute those where I don't think we can help.
Thank you. District Attorney.
Thank you very much, Dr. Barajas. I want to begin by acknowledging the law enforcement support that I enjoy, one of whom is here. That's former Oxnard Police Chief Scout Whitney, a 31-year veteran of the department and of public safety, as well as a number of others. Former Oxnard Police Chief John Cromback, former Sheriff Jeff Dean, Simi Valley Police Chief David Livingstone, as well as Community College Police Chief Joel Justice. To answer your question, Doctor, I think the transformation in the way we approach juveniles is positive. We went in the last 15 years from a model of detention, camps, and juvenile hall to one that prioritizes community-based treatment, intervention, and support. Now, there are going to be certain cases where we are going to seek transfer of a juvenile to adult court, given the egregious or heinous nature of the crime. But, you know, today, rather a couple of days ago, I attended a Juvenile Justice Coordinating Council meeting where we talked about holistic approaches to youth crime. How do you engage a public health specialist to intervene with the family to determine what's happening? How do you address a family setting where there is no immediate family? We talked about, let's bring in coaches, let's bring in counselors. Is there somebody from a spiritual organization? How do we make sure that these individuals in those very sensitive, very difficult teenage years have positive role models and mentors? And, to see that shift, that transformation in just the way we approach juveniles, I think is very healthy. I think it will reduce recidivism. I think it builds trust in our profession. And I also believe very passionately that it is the best thing for youth.
Thank you. Harvey? Yes, you want to respond?
I appreciate Mr. Nasarenko's answer, but again, crime victims have to come first, and there are juveniles out there who do things, very, very bad things to crime victims. And I'd love to sit up here and tell you that restorative justice programs for juveniles all work, and that's what we should be doing. But the focus of the district attorney has to be on crime victims and restoring their dignity and providing them justice whenever we can. Programs are great. I think the program should be after they've served whatever sentence the court deems is appropriate, not during, because it doesn't hold anyone accountable. Thank you.
Yes.
This area is so complex, it doesn't lend itself to sound bites or bumper stickers. What if a victim is seeking a treatment program for their son? What if the victim is seeking some type of intervention, cognitive behavioral therapy, moral recognition therapy? We have to be willing and open to all these possibilities. We can't simply be retributive in nature and punishment-based. Certainly, there are some cases we have to, but we have to be broad-minded and open-minded to a range of different possibilities.
Thank you. District Attorney, California Penal Code Section 1016.3 requires that district attorneys, quote, shall consider the avoidance of adverse immigration consequences in the plea negotiation process, unquote. How would you assess your office's compliance with that code? Also, how can the DA better prioritize rehabilitation or diversion programs, particularly with DACA students, recipients, to ensure that individuals accused of low-level offenses have the greatest opportunity to recover from their mistakes without suffering such immigration consequences?
It's a great question. This is an affirmative duty. It's mandatory. The penal code section you just cited, we shall consider the potential for adverse immigration consequences in fashioning disposition and pleas as one factor. The statute does state one factor. And nevertheless, this is from the United States Supreme Court, Padilla versus Kentucky, where it said you can't mete out disproportionate punishments. That is, the sentence, if it results in some instances in deportation, may be disproportionate to the offense itself, particularly one that may be minor. Here's how we deal with it. We talk to our attorneys and we say, I want you to work with defense counsel and the public defenders when appropriate to see if we can fashion an immigration neutral plea. It won't always happen, but I'll give you a couple specific examples where it has. I know of one case where an individual was Guatemalan and they had no criminal record and 3 children. In this case, it was domestic violence in nature. There was a push. As a result of the push, there were some scratches obtained by the victim. We initially charged it as a penal code section 273.5, the infliction of corporal injury upon a dating partner or spouse. The defense came to us and said that will result in deportation. The attorney looked at the case and said, you know what? They have 3 kids, no criminal record, history of employment. We will go ahead and we will make it a 243E1, a different type of charge to avoid that immigration consequence. That's one example where you look at the case in its entirety to fashion a just remedy. You still need a consequence, absolutely. You still need to make sure this person is held accountable, but we want to make sure that we're abiding by the law in the U.S. Supreme Court.
Thank you. John?
Well, as a district attorney, I'm sworn to uphold the law. So 1016.3 is the law, and I will uphold it. Now, in the example Mr. Nasarenko spoke about, if the 273.5 was charged as a misdemeanor, because it's what's called a wobbler, it means it can be charged as a felony or a misdemeanor. If it can be charged as if it was charged as a misdemeanor, and they want to give another charge of a 243E1, which is also a misdemeanor, to avoid the immigration consequences that defendant faced, I wouldn't have a problem with that. But my problem is, what if that was charged as a felony? And then we pled it out to a misdemeanor to uphold or to protect the immigration status of that person. I don't know the facts of the case, but my problem in that scenario is, again, you have to put the victims first. The DA has to do justice. The DA has to protect the defendant's rights as well as the crime victims. But when it comes to criminal defendants, the role of the DA is twofold. Number one, to ensure that all their constitutional rights are upheld. Number two, to ensure that any sentence they receive is fair and just under the circumstances of the case. After that, it's not my job to protect them. My job is to protect crime victims. So for the example that Mr. Nasarenko just proposed, I wouldn't be objecting to a disposition like that, as long as I knew that the 273.5 wasn't a felony. The role of the district attorney, it has to be to put crime victims first.
Yes.
And that's exactly what we did. In this case, the spouse is saying, I want my husband to remain in this country. I want him to be part of their children's lives. I need him economically. This was a one-off. It hadn't happened before. So that's how we take 1016.3 and marry it with a victim's voice to achieve a just outcome.
Thank you. John, you have the next question too again. Arresting or fining homeless residents and non-violent drug users, many of them whom experiencing mental health challenges for minor crimes, often makes it harder for these community members to find housing and jobs and to access treatment for addiction or other social services. Governor Newsom has proposed new care courts, quote unquote, requiring counties to provide comprehensive treatment and housing to people with debilitating psychosis. By the way, CARE stands for Community Assistance, Recovery, and Empowerment. The question is, what is your stance on prioritizing the use of the criminal justice system when addressing issues related to mental illness and homelessness, in favor of promoting diversion and community-based responses following the commission of minor offenses?
So let me just say, I'm not a fan of Governor Newsom. However, that CARE program is probably the first thing he's ever said that I have found that I've actually agreed with. I'm generally not in favor of programs for defendants while they're in the criminal justice system. I'm a big believer in accountability. What I'm also a believer in is not continuing to punish people once they've served their sentence, whatever that is. As a society, if we really want to fix problems and fix the criminal justice system and make it fair and equitable, we need to be doing two things. Number one, we need to be proactive in our approach, especially in the area of homelessness, drug use, and mental illness. And we need to be more restorative so we can re-enter people once they've served their sentence back into society to avoid recidivism. Asking a prosecutor to do these things takes away our focus, which is from crime victims. I'm not against programs. I'm not against helping defendants. I'm not against reintegrating people back into society successfully. It's not the prosecutor's job to do those things. My job is to protect the rights of defendants, to make sure they get fair and equitable treatment while they're involved in the criminal justice system, and to ensure that any sentence is fair and just. But my primary goal is putting victims first. One thing that I would really love to see, if we're serious about restorative justice, is we need to stop punishing people after they serve their sentences. While I'm a big believer in accountability, I'm also a believer in not continuing to punish people. And we do that through rap sheets. Someone is convicted of certain crimes and that stays with them forever. I would be in favor of some sort of process or program where if someone adheres to certain protocols for a given number of years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever it is, those convictions should be removed from their rap sheet and never be considered again, even strike offenses. I would be very much in favor of something like that. But asking me and my job, when my focus is on crime victims, to care more about what the criminal defendant went through, the person who hurt somebody else, I'm not in favor of that.
District Attorney.
In my 14 years in this work, I can count on so many different hands and toes how many victims have come to me and said, Erik, can you find a treatment program for him or her? Can you find detoxification? Can you go ahead and find a psychiatric facility for them to be in long term? That was the victim's voice. That's what the victim was asserting they wanted on their behalf for their public safety, for that of their family, and for that of their loved ones. So much of crime is complex, it's familial, and frankly, it has its origins in addiction, economic dislocation, job loss, lack of housing. It is complex and myriad, and we have to accept that and understand it. You know, as DAs, we can look at all the complexity and both mete out consequences and punishment when the facts and circumstances warrant it and somebody needs to be incapacitated. We have to be no nonsense and unrelenting, but there are other times we have to be broad-minded, compassionate, and open-minded. That's why I started the first ever mental health unit, to prioritize treatment in appropriate cases over jail and incarceration. I also formerly worked on behalf of our homeless court to seek out opportunities where individuals could have fines, fees, and some low-level misdemeanors removed or deleted in exchange for completion of community service, treatment program, or rehabilitation. To answer your question, Doctor, with respect to the CARES program, I support it. I think it's a step in the right direction, although I do so with a bit of a caveat. We have to create the infrastructure in counties to support CARES Court. For example, if someone said, Eric, do you have a magic wand? I said, well, give it to me. And if I had it, I'd say, can we establish a in-county sober living drug treatment facility here for both men and women so that we could have people go there rather than out of county? That would be something that would make a big difference in the lives of victims and our defendants.
Thank you. Yes, you can.
The problem we have, we can sit up here all day and talk about wonderful programs, but we don't have the infrastructure and we don't have the support we need. The state of California grants us these programs and says, you will consider those, and then never gives us the infrastructure. Have anyone here ever heard of judicial diversion? See, let me tell you about this, because we had a mental health diversion program, and it was actually had some limited success. And I say limited because the mentally ill were only getting the treatment during the time that the criminal justice system had jurisdiction over them. And then once they
Quickly, time's up.
okay, once they overcame their problems, the jurisdiction was lost, but then they would reoffend again because they didn't have that help that they needed. Judicial diversion has preempted mental health diversion in misdemeanor cases because it's easier.
Okay.
And so now the mentally ill aren't getting the help they need.
Thank you. Okay, that's your turn. District Attorney, this is a community trust question. In our county, the District Attorney's Office has traditionally not been seen to have centered the needs of those people who most depend upon the office to protect and advance their rights. Low income in our working poor, senior community in our intellectually and developmentally disabled community members depend on the DA's office for protection. How can the DA's office heighten its civil division to protect the most vulnerable in our community from consumer fraud, notary fraud, and other civil offenses that affect people's day-to-day lives? What additional resources and support should the DA's office bring to the civil side, in particular when it comes to consumer protection?
Thank you, Doctor. We established a notarial fraud task force. Eduardo Miranda and a prosecutor are a part of that task force. And part of their job is to root out these charlatans who frankly prey upon the immigrant community, representing themselves as attorneys, dispensing legal advice when they're not qualified to do so, and taking large sums of cash without giving any advice or giving fraudulent and improper advice. So you take these specific consumer-based frauds and you target them with task forces as well as with resources. I'm very committed to doing that when these issues emerge. For example, price gouging with home COVID testing kits. Think back a couple months ago. We have a specific prosecutor who was looking at complaints of price gouging by retail outfits. So you have to protect the consumer. This is financial loss. It tears asunder communities and our sense of financial well-being. And I will also add that one of the ways that we engage in civic life and fabric is by being accessible, by being open, and by being engaged. I have made it a point to be a district attorney who not only is in the courtroom, but also is in the community. To give you some specific examples, I spoke recently to the Amgen Asian Association about hate crimes. I was recently at a mosque speaking about Islamophobia. Not too long ago here in Oxnard, talking about cyberbullying in schools that target the African-American community at New Progressive Church. These are ways that we build lines of connectivity, lines of contact, and also ultimately, I believe it helps public safety, because when people understand that the DA and law enforcement are there to assist and serve them, there will be even greater disclosure and reporting of crimes.
Thank you. John?
So one of the areas in criminal law and criminal justice where I do find it inequitable is the way we prosecute theft crimes. I feel that crimes more associated with poorer people are prosecuted more harshly than theft crimes more associated with people who have means, people who have money. And yet it's fraud and it's variants of fraud that is far more destructive to a society than any robbery or home burglary could be. Now, I'm not saying robberies and home burglaries aren't serious, because they are, and they're treated that way. But a lot of times the way frauds are prosecuted, if the person just pays the money back, we reduce it to a misdemeanor. And I don't like the way that we prosecute fraud because of that aspect. I believe when it comes to fraud, because of the damage it causes not only to society, but specifically to crime victims, we should be prosecuting fraud crimes a lot more heavier than we do. And so I am all in favor of anything we can do to increase resources to any civil division or anything else to increase the punishments of fraud, because I do find that far more destructive.
Can I respond?
Go ahead. Thank you. Go ahead.
I would dispute that. We are very aggressive on fraud-based financial crimes. You look at what senior deputies like Mark Leventhal and Howard Weiss, Andrew Reed, Karen Wald, workers' compensation fraud, for example. We have secured felonies. We have secured significant jail sentences and restitutions. These are cases that we take seriously, we prosecute vigorously, and will continue to do so.
Thank you.
So Karen Wald, Howard Wise, and Mark Leventhal are fantastic. They're three of the best attorneys that we have in the office. And they do prosecute fraud very, very aggressively, but we can do better. And I think we should.
Thank you. John? State law AB 640 requires the Office of Emergency Services to develop training for district attorneys in the investigation and prosecution of sexual assault cases, child sexual exploitation cases, and child sexual abuse cases, including training in the unique emotional trauma experienced by victims of those crimes. That training course also required to cover the investigation and prosecution of sexual abuse cases involving victims with developmental disabilities. Given that people with disabilities are 7 times more likely to be victims of sexual abuse than their non-disabled peers, how do you plan to support victims being interviewed in your office who have an intellectual disability, are nonverbal, use an assistive technology speaking device, or have invisible disabilities? And the ending part of this question is, can you speak to other ways you will increase access to the justice system for community members with intellectual and developmental disabilities? I know it's a lot.
I'm first. I'm sorry. I forgot about that. Yeah, like my principle is victims come first. I'll do anything and everything to work with experts in the field who will assist us in investigating any crimes, especially sexual in nature, against the disabled, because they need our full protection as well. I'm not an expert on the subject. I don't pretend to be, but there are experts on the subject. And whatever they say we need to do in order to assist them and be able to prosecute these crimes and get the people that hurt them, I'm all in. You don't have to convince me.
Thank you. District Attorney?
We have this outstanding group, the Public Safety Racial Equity Advisory Group, and there are representatives from the disabled and disability rights community on it. And we are actually going to be meeting with one of those representatives shortly to see how do we incorporate into our Family Justice Center models a disability right component that both informs our prosecutors, victim advocates, and investigators about how sensitive and important these cases are, but also helps to bridge understanding between the disability rights community and our office. So I have seen sex cases involving disabled individuals. They are difficult and they are time intensive, but they are equally as important as any other sexual assault case. I think we have to accept that as our premise. It is incumbent upon us to take each and every victim as we find them, irrespective of disability, irrespective of status, of color, heritage, sexual orientation. We have to understand that when we serve victims, we do so in a way that builds humanity, dignity, as well as voice into their allegations. We understand where they're coming from and the disability they may have. And also we work with them to seek justice, whether or not that's giving them access as we would any other victim, or giving them opportunities for investigation as we would any other victim. So I'm very hopeful that our Family Justice Center, the one that we will have in the city of Oxnard shortly, as well as our existing one in Ventura, will be a bridge to help facilitate understanding and greater justice over these cases.
Thank you. Mr. Attorney, you have a question regarding hate crimes, domestic terrorism. In recent years, we've seen a rise in incidents that have stoked fear and terror in communities of color, and incidents that have involved self-identified hate groups. 2 years ago, a series of actions were committed in opposition to advocacy for racial justice. A woman who pepper sprayed protesters from her car without provocation, men who vandalized Black Lives Matter signs on private property. More recently, neo-Nazis have hung banners from overpasses in an illegal manner. None of these incidents resulted in prosecution. Why? And how do you plan to address such hate crimes and the activity of hate groups in the future?
Great question. We have prosecuted successfully a number of hate crimes. One in particular stands out because I just spoke about it. A Syrian woman was speaking Arabic. There was a passerby who found that offensive. A battery resulted. We prosecuted that case both as a battery as well as a hate crime, a special allegation. Similarly, there was a case involving an object thrown at a moving vehicle wherein there was a Black Lives Matter display. We too prosecuted that case, as we did with the same suspect, a case where he went ahead and ripped up and essentially vandalized a BLM poster. So we do, when the facts and circumstances warrant it, address these cases. With respect to the freeway overpasses and banners, I want to get to that. We discussed this at our committee meeting. We have sort of two statutes at our disposal. The first of which allows the California Highway Patrol to disperse a group when that group is disturbing the orderly flow of traffic. And Caltrans does indeed have the authority to remove a banner that's affixed to state property, namely an overpass, and the California Highway Patrol can enforce that. There has to be a certain notice requirement per the Streets and Highways Code that the enforcement agency has to perform. If after that notice, the banner still remains, they can go ahead and issue a citation. So we've had these very constructive meetings with the California Highway Patrol where we've talked about this law, the one I just mentioned, both Streets and Highways Code, as well as the California Vehicle Code. And, you know, this is something that has a First Amendment constitutional layer. And the issue is we can't subject ourselves to litigation. So every banner that's hanging has to be treated like any other banner. So if you have one that's hanging that's saying, "Thank you, first responders," and one that's saying "White Lives Matter," they both have to equally be removed because we don't want to engage in content specific restrictions. That's a First Amendment violation.
So this is even if it's done in an illegal manner.
you cannot place the banner on state property. It's the affixing of the banner on state property.
Thank you. John?
I don't think there's any way for me to communicate to all of you how much I abhor the idea of someone committing a crime against another person because of their perceived or actual relation to a protected class. I think it's about the most un-American thing you can do. As I stated earlier, I actually prosecuted hate crimes for 6.5 years, and I prosecuted it pretty aggressively. And it's because of my prosecution, I actually was awarded the 2014 Sherwood Prize by the Anti-Defamation League for prosecuting hate. Only 2 prosecutors in the history of our office have received that award, and I was one of them. Let me give you an idea of how aggressively I prosecuted hate crimes. 2012, 2 white supremacists walked into a Vallarta supermarket in Oxnard. They were celebrating because one of them just got out of prison. While they were in there, they were walking around yelling racial epithets. They got in line behind a Caucasian woman and her African-American son and proceeded to make threats. So we charged both defendants. One made the threats, the other one never made the threats. I prosecuted both of them. I prosecuted the second one under an aiding and abetting theory of criminal threats, which meant at trial, I had to prove that the one who did not make the threats knew what his friend was going to say before he said it. I took that case to trial. There was not a single person in my office who thought I was going to win, and I did. And that person got 7 years in prison. That's how aggressive I am when it comes to combating hate crimes. That's how aggressive I am to prosecuting hate crimes. Now, the incidents that were mentioned in the question, I don't know the facts. I don't know why they weren't prosecuted. I'd like to find out, because I abhor hate crimes, and I think my record and my reputation stand for that.
Thank you. John, you have the last question, and it is this. I'll give you a little context to it. In 2009, I attended a memorial for Alice Greenfield McGrath, and she's known as a longtime activist. She died at the age of 92. Historically, she's significant because she was the executive secretary for the Sleepy Lagoon Defense Committee. And in the memorial of 20 people, a private memorial, former district attorney spoke on her behalf, and because he knew her well. And he spoke to the issue of mercy. And I found that intriguing, that a prosecutor, district attorney would talk about mercy. I had not expected that from this person. In that regard, share with us how you have applied grace and mercy in your career as a prosecutor, and how this may or may not differ in your role as district attorney.
So there's a few things I've always prided myself on. It's my directness and my honesty, and it's also my willingness to be fair. I've actually been told that there are people that I put in jail and prison who've since gotten released who are going to vote for me because they respected the fact that I always treated them fairly. I believe in being upfront and honest with people. I believe in being direct with people, even if you don't like my answers, even if you don't like the sentence I receive. In fact, I did a fundraiser about a month ago, and a gentleman came up to me and he said, "Hey, Mr. Barrack, do you remember me?" And I looked at him and I said, "Yes, I remember you. I sent you to prison." And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "I just want you to know I'm doing really well now, and I wanted to thank you." And I said, and he goes, "I'm going to vote for you." And I said, "Well, I understand if you don't want to, that's okay." When we talk about mercy, like I said, victims come first, but that doesn't mean I'm a rabid dog going after criminals just 'cause, okay? I always treat them with respect, and I'm always fair, and I'm always honest. I always tell them what I think, why I'm thinking it. I'm open to the possibility of being wrong, because as I've always said, I'd rather get it right than be right. My wife's here in the audience. She tells me all the time how wrong I am about things. And so she's laughing because she knows it's true, but I'm completely open to the possibility that I'm wrong about things. But I've always, one of the things I've always valued about myself is in handling my job is the fact that while I am aggressive and while I put victims first, I have shown mercy, and I have been fair with criminals, and I have been fair with defendants, even some of my murder suspects. I'm always fair to them until the jury comes back with a guilty verdict.
Thank you. District Attorney.
When I think of mercy, I think one of the underpinnings of mercy is hope. We have to believe in the transformative power of change, because in order to show mercy, we need to believe and have hope and conviction. And that's the way I like to lead this office, both firm, but also with directions of hope and forgiveness, and when appropriate, looking at a broad and full picture. I'll give you a specific example, and John will know what I'm talking about. I prosecuted an individual by the name, and it was a felony, and he was later slain. He was murdered. And I remember his mom inviting me to the funeral, and I went to that funeral here in Oxnard. And, I still think about it to this day, because I know that the mom lost her son, and how deeply grieving and how horrific that was. And when I think about hope and mercy, I think about, you sometimes have to push back on people. You can't do that. You don't have enough money. If you make that decision, it's going to go ahead and create a backlash. We're going to create a domestic violence shelter at our Family Justice Center. We're going to open a new Family Justice Center for victims here in Oxnard for Mixteca, Indigenous, and monolingual Spanish communities. We're going to go back and test cold cases to see if there's DNA evidence for old rapes. We're going to continue to strive to see if we can build diversity, equity, belonging, and inclusivity into this office. That takes mercy, it takes courage, and it also takes hope. And that's what I'd like to continue to bring to this great office of men and women in the District Attorney's Office.
Thank you. Now we're at the closing statements portion of the forum. John, you have 2 minutes for a closing statement.
Thank you. So like I said, I like to be honest and I like to be direct with people. And I'm fully aware that most of the people in this audience aren't going to be voting for me, and that maybe you didn't like some of my answers to the questions. And I want you to know that's okay. If I win this election, I'm the district attorney. I want you all to hear this. And if there's anything you take away from tonight, please take this. You will all have a voice in my office. You will be heard. You will be listened to. Like I've stated, I'm not interested in being right. I'm only interested in getting it right. My focus is on crime victims, and I think I've made that pretty clear, and restoring their dignity and getting the justice they deserve. But perhaps there's a different path, and if there is, I want to hear it. If people have different ideas, I want to hear them. And if they're good ideas, I want to implement them. Understand that everything I have 2 caveats to any changes. Number 1, I don't want any further evisceration of crime victims' rights than have already happened. Number 2, I won't support anything that puts law enforcement lives in further danger than they already are. But if there's an idea that completely is different from mine, but I think it's going to work, I'll implement it, and I'll give you the credit. Because again, I just want to do what's right for this community where I grew up. Thank you.
Thank you, John. District Attorney.
I've been honored to serve for the last 15 and a half months as the Ventura County DA, and I would ask for your support when the ballots begin arriving next week to remain in this job. We've accomplished a great deal, the men and women of the District Attorney's Office. We have achieved a new sense of mission while retaining the traditions of our old mission. That is, we seek innovation when appropriate, but at the same time fulfill and serve our core mission of prosecution. A mental health unit, the first time we have established that in the Office of District Attorney. $3 million appropriated for a Family Justice Center here in Oxnard, with the County of Ventura expected to deliver another 2. A new domestic violence shelter to give women, children, a sense of hope, a sense of safe space after they leave an abusive situation. We have continued to remain true by prosecuting those who harm and hurt others. We've already had 26 jury trials in 2022, getting the wheels of justice back up and moving despite the slowdowns and shutdowns due to the pandemic. Inherently, as your district attorney, I see my mission as both prosecuting crime, holding offenders accountable, but also preventing it. And I believe one of the greatest ways we can prevent crime is by reaching out and serving our youth in schools, in restorative justice, and by taking opportunities where we meet them where they are and say, we're going to give you another pathway. We were all teenagers once, and we understand that there are temptations, there are bad peer networks. And what I really like about what we're doing in the juvenile arena now is we're saying we want to pair you with mentors, positive role models. It may not be your immediate family. It may be a second cousin, an uncle, an aunt, a coach, a counselor, a teacher, a pastor, but we're going to do that because we believe in you and your future. I ask for your vote in the next couple of weeks, and I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senior Deputy District Attorney John Barrack. Thank you, District Attorney Erik Nasarenko, for your participation and your answers to the audience. I also want to thank the audience for being here live and also remotely. And I also want to thank the organizations and the individuals who organized this event. It's been an honor to serve as its moderator. Good night.
Thank you, everybody. And just of note, this forum, both the sheriff as well as the DA forum, have been recorded. If you would like a copy of the recording, please let us know. Contact myself, John Cummings, or Willie Luca in order to facilitate you or your organization getting copies of the forum. Thank you.